The space station buzzed with activity, an ever-flowing stream of species and traders from across the galaxy. At the heart of this cacophony stood Jason, a human engineer with a knack for fixing just about anything, from temperamental quantum modulators to the standard zero-grav coffee machines. The station's market was loud, but it was also the best spot to find rare parts. Jason navigated through the crowd, his tool bag slung over his shoulder, when suddenly he collided with someone. Or rather, something, considering the vast array of beings that frequented the station. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," he exclaimed, steadying the slender, cerulean-skinned figure before him. The alien, a Tellurian known for their delicate features and sharp intellect, blinked her large, opaline eyes in surprise. "No harm done," she replied, her voice melodic but carrying an edge of confusion. "I should have watched where I was going. I'm Lyria, a researcher here." "Jason, I guess today's a day for making new friends," he said with a grin, offering a hand, human style. Lyria hesitated, looking at his hand with curiosity before taking it. The contact sent a ripple of emotion through them both. Surprise, intrigue, a dash of inexplicable joy. She withdrew her hand quickly, a frown creasing her brow. "Human emotions," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "So raw, so unfiltered." "You felt that?" Jason asked, eyebrows raised. "From just a handshake?" "Yes, we Tellurians can sense emotions, but what I felt now was unusual. It's never been so intense." Lyria seemed to ponder the sensation, her gaze drifting back to Jason's face with a mix of scientific interest and personal confusion. "I've read about your people's empathic abilities," Jason said, "but I didn't realize they were so powerful. We usually aren't affected much by non-Tellurians. Human emotions, however, are strangely potent." Lyria glanced around, noting a few curious glances from nearby shoppers. "This is not the place to discuss this. Would you care to join me for a drink? There's a quiet lounge not far from here. We can talk more freely." "Sure, lead the way." They made their way to the lounge, a dimly lit establishment with booths designed to accommodate various anatomies and preferences. The air was tinged with a mix of exotic scents, and a low hum of conversation filled the space. As they settled into a secluded booth, Lyria continued, "Your emotions are different. I felt overwhelmed by your joy and surprise. It was almost as if I was experiencing them myself." Jason chuckled softly. "I guess human emotions are a bit like our music. Lots of different notes and not always harmonious, but powerful when played right. So, what brings a Tellurian researcher to a human engineer in a market crash?" "I specialize in xenoneurology. I study how different species process emotions and thoughts," Lyria explained, her voice tinged with excitement. "Encountering such a strong reaction from a brief touch, this could be groundbreaking." Jason leaned back, intrigued. "Sounds like you've got yourself a test subject," he joked. "What do you need to study?" "Well, typically, I'd use specialized equipment in my lab to monitor brain activity and emotional responses. But since your reaction was so strong, perhaps we could start with something simpler," Lyria suggested, her gaze locked on his with an earnest intensity. "Would you mind if I tried to read your emotions again? Just to understand the initial contact." "Sure," Jason agreed, intrigued by the idea of being part of some alien research. "But only if you tell me more about what you feel and how it works." "Agreed." Lyria reached out her hand again, this time with purpose. As Jason took it, he focused on projecting a calm, reassuring feeling. The connection was immediate. Lyria closed her eyes, a slight smile curling the edges of her lips. "Fascinating," she whispered. "It's almost as if I'm inside your head, feeling what you feel but also apart from it. Human, what are you doing to my body?" "I'm losing control." Jason laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood. "Guess we're in for an interesting experiment, huh?" Lyria opened her eyes, her smile broadening in response. "Indeed, we are, Jason. Indeed, we are." The lounge's atmosphere settled into a comfortable hum as Jason and Lyria delved deeper into conversation. As they talked, another figure approached the booth, a tall, broad-shouldered man with the uniform of the station's security team. His badge identified him as Marco, and his eyes twinkled with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Everything okay here, Lyria?" Marco asked, his voice deep and carrying a slight accent. "I saw you two head off from the market and thought I'd check in." Lyria smiled warmly at him. "Yes, Marco, thank you. This is Jason, an engineer. We were just discussing some unusual scientific phenomena related to human emotions." Marco's eyebrow lifted as he looked at Jason, extending a hand. "Marco, I handle security around these parts. Human emotions, huh? Sounds like you're stirring up trouble without even trying," he joked. Jason shook Marco's hand, chuckling. "Seems like it. Lyria and I just met, but there's something about human-Tellurian interactions that's worth a deeper look. Mind if I join you?" Marco slid into the booth, his curiosity piqued. "I've seen a lot of things in this station, but nothing tops good old human unpredictability." Lyria explained the earlier incident in the market, her hands animated as she described the flood of emotions from a simple touch. Marco listened intently, nodding along. "So, you felt what Jason was feeling, just like that?" Marco asked, his tone a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "Exactly," Lyria responded. "It's more intense than anything I've studied before. Tellurians can usually sense surface emotions, but Jason's were like a storm, strong and vivid." "Maybe there's something unique about Jason here," Marco suggested, giving Jason a playful nudge. Jason laughed. "Or maybe it's Lyria who's unique. But really, I think it's worth figuring out. Maybe it could help improve relations between our species. Or give you humans another edge over us in negotiations," Marco added with a wink. Lyria's eyes sparkled with excitement. "What if we set up a controlled experiment? I have access to non-invasive scanning equipment at the research lab. We could observe the brain activity of both a human and a Tellurian during interaction." "That sounds like a solid plan," Jason agreed. "Marco, you think the station's council would go for it?" Marco scratched his chin, considering. "I'll need to clear it with them, but given the potential benefits, I don't see why not. Plus, it might give us an edge in understanding how different species can better communicate. I'll advocate for it." "Thank you, Marco. Your support means a lot," Lyria said, her tone earnest. Marco stood, preparing to leave. "I'll talk to the council first thing tomorrow. You two get your proposal ready. This could be big." After Marco left, Jason turned to Lyria. "Looks like we're partners now. How do you want to start?" "First, we need to draft a detailed proposal. Outline our hypothesis, the methods we'll use, expected outcomes. Then, if we get the green light, we'll schedule time in the lab." Lyria outlined the plan with a clear focus. Jason nodded, pulling out a digital notepad from his bag. "Let's jot down some initial thoughts. I have some ideas on how we can measure emotional variance and perhaps even attempt to control the exchange." They spent the next hour brainstorming and drafting their proposal. As they worked, their initial awkwardness faded, replaced by a shared enthusiasm for the unknown and the possibilities it could unlock. As they wrapped up, Jason glanced at Lyria, a sense of wonder in his eyes. "You know, I've worked on this station for years, and I thought I had seen everything. But today proves there's always something new on the horizon." Lyria smiled, her eyes reflecting a similar sentiment. "And perhaps together, we can explore this new frontier." With their proposal set, they left the lounge, the station's corridors quiet and almost contemplative. The stars outside the viewport twinkled, like distant eyes watching and waiting, as two species came together in the pursuit of understanding. Jason and Lyria walked through the bustling corridors of the space station, making their way to the council chamber where their proposal would be scrutinized. The metallic clink of boots on the steel floor mixed with the soft hum of distant machinery. Marco had joined them again, his presence reassuring as they approached the large, imposing doors of the council room. "Ready?" Marco asked, his face serious but his eyes encouraging. "Ready as we'll ever be," Jason replied, adjusting his tool belt more out of habit than necessity. Lyria nodded, clutching her digital pad to her chest. "Let's do this." The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a semicircular room filled with representatives from various species, each stationed behind a curved console. The trio walked to the center of the room, standing before the council in a display of unity. Marco began, "Honored council members, we come before you with a proposal that promises to deepen our understanding of interspecies communication and potentially enhance relations not only on this station but across the galaxy. I'll let the experts explain." He gestured to Lyria, who stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "Thank you, Marco. As you may know, Tellurians have the ability to sense emotions, but recent interactions with Jason, our human colleague, have uncovered anomalies in this ability that we believe are worth exploring. Our proposal outlines a series of non-invasive experiments to study these phenomena." Jason took over, clicking on a remote to bring up a display of their planned methodologies. "We'll monitor brain activity and emotional responses during various controlled interactions. Our goal is to understand the underlying mechanisms of these anomalies and their implications." A murmur rippled through the council, various members whispering among themselves. A Grisnak, a species known for their critical thinking, raised a hand, his voice booming through the chamber. "How do you intend to ensure that these experiments do not compromise the emotional integrity of the participants?" Jason responded, "Great question. We plan to use established ethical guidelines, with continuous monitoring and consent forms that ensure participants can withdraw at any time without repercussions." Another council member, a slim, insectoid creature, chimed in, "And what do you seek to gain from these experiments? What is the practical application?" Lyria answered, "Understanding these emotional exchanges could lead to improved diplomatic protocols, better conflict resolution strategies, and perhaps even educational reforms that could benefit all species aboard this station and beyond." The council deliberated for what seemed like hours. Jason, Lyria, and Marco waited patiently, occasionally exchanging hopeful glances. Finally, the head of the council, a wise old Varnick known for her fair judgments, spoke. "We have reviewed your proposal and discussed its merits and risks. We find that the potential benefits of this research outweigh the concerns. You are granted permission to proceed with your study, with the stipulation that you report your findings to this council at regular intervals." Relief washed over the trio as they thanked the council and exited the chamber. Once outside, Marco clapped both Jason and Lyria on the back. "Well done, you two. I had a good feeling about this." As they walked back towards the lab, Jason turned to Lyria with a smile. "Looks like we're officially research partners now. How do you feel about that?" Lyria's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I'm eager to start. There's so much we could discover together. And I'm just happy to be part of something this groundbreaking," Marco added, his usual joking manner replaced by a tone of genuine interest. "I'll be around to help out however I can. Security's more than just patrolling and paperwork, you know?" The three laughed together, their shared mission bringing them closer as colleagues and as friends. As they neared the lab, the station's artificial lights gleamed off the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with possibilities. Their journey of discovery was just beginning, and the road ahead promised to be filled with intriguing and transformative experiences. The research lab was abuzz with preparations. Lyria, Jason, and Marco, along with a few volunteers from various species, were setting up for the first series of experiments. The lab, usually a quiet space for contemplation and study, now thrummed with the energy of anticipation. Jason checked the calibration on the neuroimaging equipment, a complex array of sensors and scanners that would provide real-time data during their tests. "Looks like everything's operational," he announced, wiping his brow. "You ready to make history, Lyria?" Lyria, examining her own set of instruments, nodded with a smile. "As ready as one can be for venturing into the unknown, Jason." Marco, who had volunteered to assist with security and logistics, chimed in from his station. "Just make sure you two don't discover something too shocking. I'm not sure how much excitement I can take in one day." The first volunteer, a gentle, four-armed Galver, took his place in the testing area. Jason and Lyria explained the procedure to him, ensuring he felt comfortable and understood the scope of the experiment. "As we proceed," Lyria began, her voice calm and reassuring, "please remember that you can stop at any time. Your well-being is our priority." The Galver nodded, his eyes conveying trust. "I am ready to proceed." Jason initiated the scan, and as the equipment hummed to life, he monitored the displays closely. "All systems look good." Lyria, You're up? Lyria approached the Galver, extending her hands slightly. As she focused, a soft glow emanated from her fingertips, a visual indicator of her empathic engagement. The room fell silent, all eyes on the screens showing live data. After a few moments, Lyria stepped back, her expression thoughtful. Interesting. There's a significant overlap in the emotional centers of our brains when I engage. It's like our minds are temporarily merging. Jason analyzed the data. The scans confirm your sensations. It's almost as if your empathic abilities are creating a bridge between your consciousness and his. Marco, ever the observer, added, "It's like watching two instruments tuned to each other." The session continued with volunteers from different species, each interaction shedding light on the unique ways in which various races experienced and processed emotions. As the day progressed, patterns began to emerge, hinting at a fundamental connectivity that transcended species boundaries. As the last volunteer left the room, Jason turned to Lyria with excitement. "This is groundbreaking, Lyria. Your abilities, they don't just sense emotions. They interact with them on a neurological level." Lyria, still focused on the data, nodded slowly. "Yes, and it seems that humans, with their intense emotional spectrum, amplify this effect. It's as if your emotional expressions help to unlock and synchronize with the emotions of others." Marco looked between the two, a grin spreading across his face. "So, in a way, humans might be key to fostering deeper interspecies empathy?" "Possibly," Jason mused. "Our emotional intensity could be a tool, not just a trait." As they began to pack up for the day, Lyria turned to her colleagues, her eyes bright with the thrill of discovery. "We need to document everything and prepare for a more detailed study. This could change how all species interact on a fundamental level." Marco, collecting some of the equipment, looked over his shoulder. "And to think I was just here to make sure things stayed orderly. You guys are making me feel like a part of something much bigger." "You are," Jason said, clapping Marco on the back. "This is just the start. Tomorrow, we dive deeper. We'll need all the help we can get." Together, they left the lab, the corridor lights casting long shadows behind them as they discussed their next steps. Their collaboration had begun as a simple experiment, but was quickly evolving into a journey that might one day bridge the vast emotional divides between the stars. The following morning, the lab felt charged with a palpable excitement as Jason, Lyria, and Marco set up for a deeper dive into the data and observations from the previous day's experiments. Today's focus was more refined, aiming to explore the nuances of human-to-Lyrian interactions under controlled emotional stimuli. Jason adjusted the sensory output on the neuroimaging machine. "We're going to introduce a series of emotional prompts today. Images, sounds, even scents that evoke specific feelings. I want to see how they affect our empathic bridge." Marco, looking over the equipment settings, nodded. "Do you think this could actually lead to a way to train or enhance empathic abilities in other species?" "It's possible," Lyria interjected, her eyes scanning the setup with an expert's gaze. "If we can map out how different stimuli affect emotional responses universally, we might be able to develop training protocols or even therapeutic uses." Jason smiled at her enthusiasm. "One step at a time, Lyria. Let's start with understanding before we move on to application." As the first volunteer, a human this time, settled into the testing chair, Marco handed him a set of headphones and a visor for audiovisual stimuli. "Just relax and let us know if anything feels uncomfortable," he instructed gently. Lyria prepared her own sensors, the soft glow from her hands indicating she was ready to initiate contact. "I'm starting the empathic link now," she announced, and the room hushed in anticipation. Jason watched the screens closely as emotional cues were introduced. The human volunteer experienced a range of emotions from joy to sadness, each elicited by carefully chosen stimuli. On the monitors, Jason could see the volunteer's brain activity shift with each new emotion, and intriguingly, Lyria's brain mirrored those shifts. "Lyria, are you feeling these emotions as they happen?" Jason asked, his voice low but filled with curiosity. "Yes, it's almost instantaneous. The connection feels stronger with directed stimuli," Lyria responded, her concentration unbroken. Marco, observing the data alongside Jason, whistled softly. That's incredible. It's like she's tuning into each frequency of emotion as it comes. As the experiment progressed, they switched the roles. Lyria became the receiver of stimuli, with the human volunteer attempting to extend his emotional responses towards her. The results were equally fascinating, displaying a bidirectional flow of emotional states. After the session, as the volunteer left the lab, Marco turned to Lyria and Jason. What's your take on this? It seems like there's a genuine two-way street when it comes to emotions between humans and Tellurians. Lyria took a moment before answering, her eyes fixed on the data scrolling on her screen. It's more than I anticipated. Our species might be more compatible emotionally than we are physically. This could explain the depth of the emotional responses. Jason nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. This understanding could revolutionize how we approach interspecies relations. Emotions are often the biggest barrier, or bridge, in diplomacy. Marco chuckled, folding his arms across his chest. And to think I was just here to make sure no one tripped over a cable. Now, I'm witnessing potential history in the making. Would you be willing to be a volunteer, Marco? Lyria asked suddenly, a playful challenge in her tone. Marco raised his eyebrows, a grin spreading across his face. Why not? Let's see if your human Tellurian magic works on me. The rest of the day was spent testing with Marco and other volunteers, deepening their understanding of the intricate dance of emotions shared between species. Each test added a layer of complexity and promise to their findings, driving them closer to a breakthrough that could one day change the fabric of interspecies interactions. As the lab lights dimmed, signaling the end of another day, the trio sat together, reviewing the data. Their collaboration, born of chance and curiosity, had grown into a partnership that might just alter the understanding of empathy across the cosmos. The laboratory had become a second home for Jason, Lyria, and Marco, each day bringing new insights and deeper connections. Today, they planned to push the boundaries of their research further, aiming to understand not just the reactive but the proactive capabilities of emotional transference between humans and Tellurians. As they prepared the lab, Marco looked over the schedule. So, today we're trying something different, right? We're not just observing. We're attempting to influence emotions directly? That's the plan, Jason confirmed, adjusting the settings on the neuroimaging machine. We've seen that emotions can be shared and mirrored. Now we want to see if they can be gently directed or enhanced. Lyria added, imagine the possibilities if we can learn to not only share but also modulate emotions across species. It could lead to more than just improved diplomatic relations. It might be the key to treating emotional disorders galaxy-wide. Marco nodded, his usual jovial demeanor tinged with the seriousness of their task. Let's get to it then. The first part of the experiment involved Jason and a new volunteer, a human known for his equanimity. They were both hooked up to the neuroimaging devices. Lyria watched from a console, ready to document any changes. Jason, I want you to try to project a feeling of calm to our volunteer, Lyria instructed, her voice steady over the intercom. Jason closed his eyes, focusing on calm thoughts, the silent tranquility of space, the gentle hum of the station. The volunteer, under Lyria's guidance, tried to open himself to these emotions. On the monitors, a slow but sure synchronization appeared between their brain patterns. Marco, overseeing the data, couldn't hide his excitement. It's working. Look at that alignment. It's like they're tuning into the same emotional wavelength. Encouraged, they proceeded to the next phase, where Lyria and Marco would attempt a similar connection. Lyria was now the receiver and Marco the sender, his task to project a sense of joy. Think of something that makes you really happy, Marco, Lyria suggested, a smile in her voice. Marco chuckled, focusing on a cherished memory of laughter with friends, the thrill of a successful mission, the pride of accomplishment. As he concentrated, the room felt lighter, almost buzzing with his positive energy. Lyria's laughter rang out suddenly, genuine and infectious. Marco, it's working. I can feel your joy. It's overwhelming. On the screens, their brain activities danced in a vibrant symphony of alignment. Jason, monitoring the results, was amazed. This is beyond what we hoped for. You're not just sharing emotions, you're actually amplifying them. As the experiments continued, Each session brought them closer to understanding the mechanics of emotional transference. They experimented with various emotions, documenting everything meticulously. The potential applications of their findings were vast, from therapy and medicine to negotiations and peacekeeping. At the end of the day, the trio gathered to discuss their results. The lab was quiet. The only sound the soft were of computers processing the last of the data. "We've tapped into something profound," Jason said, his voice filled with awe. The ability to connect so deeply, to truly share and influence emotions. It's like discovering a new language. Marco nodded in agreement. "It's more than just science now. It feels like we're pioneers on the frontier of empathy." Lyria, ever the scientist, was already thinking ahead. "We need to consider the ethical implications and the potential for misuse. This power to connect is incredible, but it must be safeguarded." Jason acknowledged this with a nod. "Absolutely. Our next steps should include developing guidelines for ethical use, even as we explore further." The weight of their discoveries hung in the air, a mixture of excitement and responsibility. They knew that what they were doing could change the universe, one emotional connection at a time. As they locked up the lab, the stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter, reflecting back the light of their newfound understanding. The excitement of their groundbreaking discoveries was tempered by the growing scrutiny from various factions within the space station. News of their experimental success had spread, and with it came both support and concern from different quarters. In the lab, Jason, Lyria, and Marco gathered to discuss the recent attention their project had attracted. The room was tense, the usual hum of machinery now a backdrop to more serious deliberations. Marco, who had just come from a meeting with station security, shared the latest developments. "There's been some pushback from a few council members and some of the other species representatives. They're concerned about the potential misuse of the technology." Jason frowned, his hands clenched slightly. "Misuse? We're talking about revolutionizing treatment for emotional disorders, enhancing diplomatic relations." "And that's exactly what scares them," Marco interrupted gently. "Power, even for good, can be twisted. They worry about emotional manipulation on a scale we haven't seen before." Lyria added, her voice calm but firm. "We need to present our research responsibly. We must ensure that ethical guidelines are not just suggested, but enforced." The conversation was interrupted by a chime at the door. A human representative from the council, Mr. Hammond, entered. His expression was grave, his usual jovial demeanor absent. "Jason, Lyria, Marco," he began, nodding to each in turn. "I won't mince words. There's a proposal on the table to halt your experiments until further notice. Some members are calling for a complete review of all your data and methodologies." Jason stood, his frustration evident. "That could set us back months, if not kill the project outright. We're on the cusp of something transformative." Hammond held up a hand, signaling for calm. "I understand, and personally, I see the immense value in your work. However, you need to convince the council of that. They're waiting for you to make your case." Marco stepped forward, his stance resolute. "Let's give them more than just assurances. Let's show them the safeguards we'll put in place. Let's make them see the good." Lyria nodded in agreement. "We have an opportunity here not just to defend our work, but to set the standard for how it should be conducted. Ethical, transparent, and with the well-being of all at heart." With a plan in mind, they prepared a comprehensive presentation, outlining the potential benefits of their research, detailed safety measures, and strict ethical standards. The following day, they presented their case before the council in a session that was broadcast throughout the station. Jason spoke passionately about the potential to bridge understanding between species. Lyria detailed the scientific processes, emphasizing the voluntary nature of their studies and the care taken to ensure participant safety. Marco discussed the security measures, promising oversight and transparency. The council listened, their faces unreadable. The debate that followed was intense, with voices raised in concern but also in support. After what felt like hours, the council retired to deliberate. The trio waited in a tense silence, the weight of their career-defining moment pressing down upon them. Finally, the council returned, and the head of the council, a venerable Tarkian elder, addressed the assembly. After careful consideration, we have decided to allow the continuation of your research with conditions. There will be regular oversight by an ethics committee, and any further experiments will need prior approval. Relief washed over Jason, Lyria, and Marco, though tempered with the realization of the battles yet to come. "We won't let you down," Jason promised, his voice steady. Lyria smiled, her optimism undimmed. "This is just the beginning. Thank you for trusting us to navigate this responsibly." As they left the council chamber, the gravity of their responsibility and the potential of their future endeavors settled around them like a cloak. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but the promise of what they could achieve together spurred them on, their unity and purpose renewed. After the council's decision, Jason, Lyria, and Marco found themselves back in the lab, the usual clatter and buzz of equipment now accompanied by a sense of purposeful anticipation. They were clear to proceed, but under the watchful eyes of the newly formed ethics committee. Marco initiated the conversation, looking between his two colleagues with a serious yet hopeful gaze. "All right, team, we have the green light, but our work is just beginning. We need to be meticulous, transparent, and above all, ethical. Are we ready to set a new standard?" Jason nodded, his demeanor composed but his eyes alight with the fire of determination. "More than ready. Let's get to it. First order of business, we should review all our protocols and make sure they align with the new guidelines." Lyria, who had been organizing data on her tablet, looked up and added, "And I think we should also schedule regular updates with the ethics committee. Keeping them informed might help ease any concerns and demonstrate our commitment to transparency." Marco agreed, tapping notes into his own device. "Good point. I'll set up a bi-weekly meeting with them. I'll also handle any security concerns they have. We need to make sure that everything we do here is not just scientifically sound but also secure." The days that followed were a flurry of activity. The lab was reorganized to accommodate the oversight requirements, and each experiment now included a pre-check and a post-session review to ensure all protocols were followed to the letter. During one such session, with the ethics committee observing, Jason led a particularly sensitive experiment focusing on cross-species empathy enhancement. The volunteer, a Zeltronian known for their typically reserved emotions, was paired with a human to explore emotional resonance under guided scenarios. As Jason monitored the equipment, he explained to the committee and the observers, "We're not just looking to see if emotions can be shared, but if understanding through these emotions can lead to better cooperation and empathy across species boundaries." Lyria, overseeing the empathic link, interjected, "The potential here is immense, not just for understanding, but for healing. Emotional wounds are as debilitating as physical ones, perhaps even more so because they're invisible." The experiment proceeded smoothly, with notable results. The Zeltronian, initially distant, gradually opened up, their emotional barriers lowering under the gentle guidance of the empathic process. It was a profound moment, not just for those involved, but for everyone observing. After the session, a member of the ethics committee approached Jason, Lyria, and Marco. "I must admit, I was skeptical about the scope of your work and its implications. But seeing the genuine connection and understanding that's possible, I think you're truly onto something vital." Jason smiled, relieved and gratified. "Thank you. We believe this is just the beginning. With careful application, we can bridge gaps we didn't even realize were there." The project continued, each experiment building on the last, refining their techniques and deepening their understanding. The ethical oversight proved to be a boon, not a hindrance, as it guided their scientific inquiry into responsible and beneficial channels. As their findings accumulated, the implications of their work began to resonate throughout the station. Species that had once coexisted with polite detachment were starting to explore new realms of empathy and understanding, facilitated by workshops and training sessions led by Jason, Lyria, and Marco. In their final team meeting of the project phase, Marco looked around the lab, a grin spreading across his face. "You know, when I first signed on to help out with security for this project, I never imagined I'd be part of changing how species interact on a fundamental level." Lyria, her eyes gleaming with the joy of accomplishment, nodded. "We've started something that can't be undone, a shift towards empathy and understanding. It's a new chapter for everyone on this station." Jason, leaning back against the lab counter, arms crossed and a satisfied grin on his face, summed it up. We set out to explore emotions, and we ended up discovering how to bring the galaxy a little closer together. Here's to the power of science and empathy. Together, they stepped out of the lab, not just as colleagues, but as pioneers of a new understanding, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead in the newly empathic galaxy.